Meeting come to order. Today is Monday, March 28th, 2016. This is a special meeting of the Prescott City Council. Roll call, please.
Mayor Oberg.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Lamerson.
Here.
Councilman Blair.
Yes.
Councilman Lozelle is absent excused. Councilwoman Orr.
Here.
Councilman Shiska.
Here.
And Councilwoman Wilcox
Here.
is attending telephonically. And you have a quorum.
Good. Welcome back, Councilwoman Wilcox, even though we got you by electrons.
That's right, yeah.
Okay. Today's special meeting is to give the public and some of the folks here on the council an opportunity to be introduced to strategic planning. Being in the military for a long time, that was something that we did quite a bit of. I'm quite familiar with it. I know a lot of people that were in business, particularly in probably late 90s, early 2000s. Probably had to experience a lot of what it was like to have a strategic plan. Many organizations came up with strategic plans and then put them on the shelf and didn't do anything about them until next year and looked at them again and put them back on the shelf. But hopefully, if we move forward on this strategic plan, if we decide to go that direction, we'll support the city in looking at projects and the issues that are facing us to start to lay out a pathway on how we're going to move forward on some of these things. So I think with that, I'll have you go ahead and make the first presentation.
Item 1A, presentation by Patrick Ibarra, the Mejorando Group regarding facilitation of a strategic planning process for the city.
Mayor, Patrick.
Thanks, Mayor, City Council. I'm delighted to be here this afternoon to discuss with you an approach around strategic planning. And I'm going to emphasize the notion of planning as a process, not an event. I think to your point, Mayor, that's what sort of the dark cloud that sort of used to surround strategic planning was. It was one of those gatherings for a day or two, and people would have very good intentions, and they would struggle to operationalize it. And the intent here for this strategic planning is really, the focus is on implementation. At the same time, it's about creating some cohesion among mayor and council about those challenges you have to build even a stronger community. And strategic planning is simply a device to help you focus your time and attention on the resources. The budget is another device. The land use plan is another device. You have all these devices. The strategic plan, at least at the beginning here, is an attempt to coalesce some of those and filter those through the strategic planning process. And what I want to do today is I've got a quick PowerPoint presentation. You should have hard copies in front of you. I'm going to walk through that. I'll be glad to answer questions as we go throughout this. I want to make sure that I'm also clear that this was in response to the city's request for qualification. So this was a process the city had initiated sometime back early February or so. We were one of the firms that responded. We were fortunate to be the top firm that's being recommended today for you to proceed as your partner in devising and facilitating the strategic planning process. So I'm going to walk through the PowerPoint here. First slide is just a little bit about Prescott. The next one is just about our firm. Mejorando is Spanish. It means getting better all the time. We're based in Glendale, down in the Phoenix area. We've been in business since 2002. I'm a former city manager. I spent 15 years in city government before I started the firm. We have clients all over the nation, several in Arizona. We have provided strategic planning services for the following cities within the last 14 months. Apache Junction, Avondale, Chandler, Glendale, Maricopa, and we're right now in the process of working with the city of Phoenix. Every city has a different focus in regards to what strategic planning is. It's not one size fits all. So we customize the approach based on what the need is and the sense of urgency for that community. So when I share with you that those are the cities we've worked with, and we've worked with cities, Bainbridge Island, Washington, Hilton Head Island, South Carolina, Portland, Texas, several cities around the nation, it's fairly becoming more common. One of the dividends that came out of the recession was council, a lot of governing bodies realized a budget was not the equivalent of a strategic plan. And as they look to try to build a community and respond to these changes that in some respects are nonlinear, that you're confronted with, fiscal, infrastructure, community-wise, all these different challenges you have, a lot of communities have decided to embrace the strategic planning process. So they convene annually to look essentially out of the horizon the next couple of years and say, what are we going to do now to make sure that our budget, our process, our priorities are operationalized to meet some of those needs? And we know historically government is challenged by being proactive, and this is really a tool to help government be more proactive intentionally and purposely. You always have to be responsive, Sometimes you're reactive as an industry. This is a chance, as you said, Mayor, from your past life, that it was a fairly common practice. Strategic planning is one of those common practices that are becoming more common by cities and counties around the nation. Anyway, that's a little bit on our firm. I own the firm, and we're sole proprietor business. We bring talent around projects, and we've worked in strategic planning for a number of years, and I'm certified as a facilitator. And what I bring to you, I think, is both a strong process as well as substantive content, having served in local government for almost 15 years, and all of our clients are cities and counties. So I can share at least a perspective with you during the process of maybe how some other cities have tackled it, not a cut and paste approach simply, but simply to offer some insight and some guidance, maybe some counsel. And I sort of fashion myself as your trail guide in this process. I can't take the journey for you. This is your community, but I can help you sort of stop, look up, look around, and see what's on that journey, and maybe highlight those aspects and help you identify what it is that you want to do, and also importantly help you decide what you're not going to do. And I think that's always a challenge. So that's a little bit of background in our firm. And let me just explain the difference between, because this comes up often, the difference between a strategic planning process and a comprehensive plan or general plan or a land use plan. You have to remember that a general plan, a comprehensive plan, a land use is primarily around land use, zoning, setbacks, sign regulations, usage, public facilities. There's a lot of content, a lot of time is invested in creation of a land use plan. That's a piece of the strategic plan, but a land use plan does not necessarily make decisions about when and where and how that you would decide in a strategic planning process. This is a priority setting process. And I would encourage you as you look at this to identify as a handful of key areas that you're going to continually focus on over the next several years. The land use plan sort of comes up, it's a device, it's a planning tool that as people walk up to building permit process or land use or they want to rezone, that's to guide the physical infrastructure of the community. Your decisions are both around that possibly, as well as community related issues. How you're going to build, if you're going to grow, what's it going to look like, how you're going to provide even more quality of life measures, how you're going to enhance that quality of life. The land use plan doesn't address that, and it's not really supposed to. So there's a clear distinction between what the role and the benefit of a land use plan is and the role and the benefit of a strategic plan. If anything that I would offer to you over time, I think you'll see the land use plan is to be a subset of your strategic plan. But that takes time, considering that this is essentially the first foray for the city to embrace strategic planning. I think it takes time, and I've seen this with communities I've worked over several years, where it takes, to become more proficient in that process, you start to pull together and leverage those other devices. And how do you unify the focus? And again, that's my role, is to help continually push you, advocate, encourage you, thinning out the process and deciding what are those key priorities. And you all know better than I as elected officials, that's always the challenge in local government, because there's that tug of war of let's go this direction, let's go that direction, and you're essentially trying to reconcile those directions and saying, where's true north, if you will. So,
Councilwoman Wilcox, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
let me just share with you, and some of these were cited in your the RFQ that was issued, as well as just some trends that are impacting local governments, rural and urban, large and small across the nation, just the whole notion of fiscal uncertainty, and you have some particular challenges there as you look on the horizon. You've done some essentially financial forecasting about expenses and revenues, and you see on the horizon that's going to be a challenge. So, and then just the volatility of the economy and the notion of economic development, how you're going to grow, what's that going to look like, job creation, rooftops, commercial, industrial. So economic development is always probably the most popular topic that city councils consider when they convene for strategic planning is economic development, because we can all appreciate it's really the engine behind the entire community. Shifting priorities, you know, that again, the balancing act, about the challenges and that tug of war that you're trying to go in this direction, then something happens and then you're trying to go in that direction. Again, there's so much ambiguity that is present in your role in building a community. This strategic planning process is not meant to eradicate that, but it is meant to leverage some of that. Because waiting longer does not necessarily solve the problem. Trying to get out in front of some of that and leverage that. The pressures from growth, there's both dividends from growth and there's unintended consequences from growth. How you're going to manage the growth, what's that look like? Again, generally speaking, not exactly, that's what the land use plan does, but generally speaking, if you're going to grow, what's it going to look like and what do you want to encourage in that growth? Increasing service demands, we know the public is always sort of requesting, if not demanding, more in some respects, more from local governments. These are national trends. The degree to which they impact the Prescott community, obviously that's the process you're going to go through if you convene for this strategic planning process. How the ebb and the flow of service demands, people want this, people want that. There are some people who want to turn government into a vending machine. At the other end of the spectrum, there are people who want government to do everything. Somewhere you got to find that sweet spot about how do you meet service expectations from the public, meanwhile staying focused on what you're trying to do. The environmental stewardship, obviously that's part and parcel of what you're trying to do, being responsible stewards of the environment. How's that get factored in? That's always a challenge as well. What's that look like? How much does it cost? Do we spend more money to take care of the environment? Again, that's always evolving, because we learn, science reveals things all the time. The federal and state regulations, they tend to identify things that government should be doing at a local level. So being good stewards of the environment. The role of government, that's where I see that really is one of the critical aspects of the strategic planning process. How active do you want to be as community builders? What's that focus look like? Is the future simply an extrapolation of the present? And is that the present extrapolation of the past? So how do you see your role as the governing body elected by the voters of this community? How active do you want to be in dealing with these challenges? Because these challenges are happening in some respects at breakneck speed. They're nonlinear, so they're somewhat disruptive. How do you sort of work through those processes and come out on the other side? I call these the headwinds, and what the process of strategic planning is to convert the headwinds into a tailwind. So it helps you translate these forces, and then they have less influence in some respects. Like any organization, when you're able to work and dissect those and examine them in some detail, it helps you get on the other side of those issues to help you drive those. Again, you're not going to fix these. No industry can fix the trends. They sort of are happening, but it's how do you get out in front of those and translate those. And it's also what I call a social currency with the community. You're seeing that here in Prescott, the ebb and the flow of social media, how people are interacting with government, either online or in person. As you well know, as elected officials, when you have a credible process and you make good decisions, it helps foster social currency with the community. And you're never really done with that. And social currency shows up in ballot issues, elections, people who serve on boards and commissions. But that social currency or social capital is critical, and you're never really done with acquiring it. You acquire it, you use it, you acquire more. This is a process that can help you leverage that. And I think what we're seeing across the nation, and I'm sure here in this community, is the public's expectation about how they want to be involved in processes, how they want to be involved in the building of their community. The next slide is the budget goals that you've identified in this year's budget. I was simply sharing these with you. And I would offer to you that what the strategic planning may end up doing, depending on how you operationalize it, it may take some segments of the budget and really accelerate some of those demands, some of those opportunities. I use the analogy of driving a car for strategic planning. You identify from these goals maybe where you want to press on the gas, where do you want to go faster, and what's the destination. You may also decide where you want to tap the brakes. Maybe you go a little slower as you build the community. And that's not meant to, that's a deficiency. It's meant you're making those judgment decisions. And then maybe what are some of those items you want to add to the car, add to the chassis? Those new things that are happening and you're trying to be responsive. These budget goals are definitely going to be a part of your discussion. This discussion helps essentially take some of these goals and put some more emphasis on which ones should happen sooner than later. I would also offer you the strategic planning is not simply about where you're going to spend money, it's how you're going to spend time. One of the outcomes of this is to make sure there's a shared understanding between the council and the city manager and his staff. And there's no more important ingredient than in a good partnership like that than a shared agreement about what those priorities are. So this is not simply a dollar and cents issue about when you pursue strategic planning. It's also about a matter about where the city manager and his staff is going to devote their time to maybe bring back policy issues before you or growth-related issues. So it's not just simply a dollar. I hope that I'm being clear about that. That it's also about on what people are going to spend their time and how soon do you want things to happen. And I would offer to you my opinion simply that I don't think money is the organization's most precious resource. Time is. That's always the challenge in government. On what are people spending their time to achieve what? This strategic planning helps you, I think, really fine-tune that to a way, at least from a council, that you know exactly these are the areas that you want to see progress made against for the foreseeable future. And in the meantime, you still have to be responsive to those issues that occur throughout the balance of the year. So here's the strategic planning process, and it's fairly conventional, the process. We essentially would, on the time we would convene, and I call this an advance instead of a retreat because I think it's more important about where you're going than where you've been. We would do a situation analysis, and that's simply looking at those factors and have a discussion among all of you What are you hearing from your neighbors? What are you hearing what are you hearing at work? What are you hearing at church? What are you hearing? What's the buzz of the community? And what are you reading about? What do you hear at the league conferences? What do you notice in your business endeavors? Just the situation analysis. What's going on in Prescott? Trying to identify that. Can't always fix it. That is a piece of this. What are those forces? And we would examine what's the impact of those. And how significant would that impact be? Do you want to address that? Do you not? If you do want to address it, that's where we get into how do you want to address it? What's the best way to do it? The mechanics of it. We would look at your values, vision, and mission statement. Those are guiding tools about how you're building the community. They do have a place in this to make sure that your decisions that you're making are consistent with the vision, values, and mission statement that has been adopted for the organization and thus the community. We would then transition into, from this discussion, what are those goals? And think of goals as performance magnets. They tend to link, time and attention to achievement. And that's the role of goals. You all would, in the session, start to identify, here's what you see happening on the horizon, and here are some goals, some key policy areas that you think would be helpful to accelerate that budget or to address things that maybe the budget didn't address, some policy issues. What are some of those key policy areas? And those are really substantive discussions. And as I like to say to city councils, there are some people on council that are big picture thinkers, and there are some that are down in the weeds, if you will. I think the best councils know how to blend those perspectives into making good decisions. And so there is some patience with the process here. This is not just some esoteric discussion to talk about the future, 20 years. One thing that did come out of definitely 9/11 and the recession is there's no really 20-year planning anymore, because there's so much volatility and uncertainty. 3 to 5 years, even next 1 to 2 years is really what you're looking at. Again, you have to look at further because some of that work takes some deliberations and some decisions now to deal with those further down the road. And then we would also look at performance measurements. That would be further steps down into this process. If you adopt the goals, and how will you know if you're making progress? And just on a mechanical side of that, I always recommend to clients that the city manager provide quarterly updates to the city council, and they're not just in the packet, but you actually discuss them. Because I think it's a way that you see the evidence of the work and time that you invested, that you see what's happening. You would see some of the goals or the policy areas that you adopt would result in some items coming back before you. So you're going to want to know when is this happening? Is this happening in the summer or the fall? When is this happening? So I think just that what we all hear a lot of is just that steady diet of communication keeps everybody in this room and the community informed about the status of progress against the strategic plan. The challenge here is also to manage expectations. This is not a silver bullet. It doesn't, again, back to that peanut butter approach, we just spread it out, everybody gets something. It's really, these are tough decisions that you make as elected officials about what you're going to decide to do going forward into the near and somewhat, maybe not so near future. But this strategic planning process, the way I've outlined it, is fairly conventional. Right? How we've tailored it for you all, based on the RFQ and conversations that I've had with the city manager and his staff, starting clockwise here, this is the first step about gaining approval of the process. And let me just share with you how the process, the RFQ outlines some of this, and then based on those discussions, the city manager and I sort of crafted and customized it based on those discussions. If this is approved at this point or at some time in the near future, what we see as the first step are some pre-planning sessions with each of you individually, where I would sit down and spend some time, up to an hour, chatting with you, and I would ask you some open-ended questions. What do you hope to gain out of this process? What do you want to address in this process? I need to get a feel for that as a facilitator about where each of you are coming from. Those are those pre-planning sessions. Helps us build some rapport. I think that's always important. But more important is for me to be able to obtain some content. We don't want to guess about what you think needs to be addressed during the advanced session. So I meet with each of you, fairly informally, grab that, take some notes, summarize that, and move on to the next step, summarize those, and prepare the agenda in consultation with the city manager. So I would share with him the highlights. Here's what I'm hearing. Here's what I think. He'd have some thoughts. You all would have some thoughts about how we put the agenda together. We want to make sure when you come in that day for the advance that there's people that you all have skin in the game, that you understand what we're trying to tackle, and we're not spending time, we're not wasting time trying to figure out what you're going to discuss. We've already done all that spade work. I have found in cities that I work in, when we do this process, it saves a substantial amount of time, and it makes better use of your time when you're actually together for that one day, because one day is not necessarily a long time. I think you can make great progress if we do the pre-work, and that's what we would be doing in this process. We then would facilitate one advance, a half day, with the city manager and his staff, and that would precede your advance meeting. And the reason we would do this is the city manager and I spoke, and we've done this many times in other cities, department directors always have a point of view about what they see on the horizon. They're paid professionals. They're out in the community. They get a sense of what's going on in the industry, what's going on in the profession. So I actually would facilitate a half-day session with them, obtaining their input about what they would see as a preferred list of topics that they would like to see you discuss when you convene for your advanced session. So essentially, we'd be grabbing some fresh information, not a wish list, but a preferred list of topics that are going to be substantial and significant that as you all convene, when you come to that point in your discussions, you're essentially hearing it from the city manager and I as we carry this forward where the department heads are. Because again, they're living in that world on a daily basis. They see trends differently, but some of the same trends just like you do. Then the next segment, we'd facilitate the advanced meeting with all of you. That would be a one-day gathering. The process there is really to look at that mission, vision, values, reaffirm some of that, spend some time on those topics that you identified that relate to the strategic plan, then focus your time and attention for the balance of the day to say, as you look into the horizon, into the crystal ball, if you will, what do you see on the horizon and what do you want to do to address some of those issues? And I'm simplifying them. I mean, those are tough questions. There's really no right answer to that. And that's for where I think this process really benefits you all as a group. I think it helps you fortify those relationships you have as colleagues. It helps you clarify your focus about what you're going to do as a governing body. And I think it also benefits the community so they understand there's a clear direction with some level of ambiguity that's always present in communities, but you have some clarity, and clarity, I think, is an incredible, powerful outcome, and it's somewhat fleeting because it's tentative based on the shifting circumstances, but you have some clarity about what you're trying to do as elected officials going forward in the near future and building a stronger community. And based on the challenges you have, like most communities, that's by no means, a simple process. This requires some really deep thought, some expansive thought. My role is to facilitate that process for you. I mean, this is your community, these are your ideas, and these are your outcomes. From that, we would then take that, the city manager and I would essentially put together the strategic plan. It won't be anything, four color or real fancy. This first time out of the gate, I think it's going to be a working document. It's going to be a blueprint, and the outcome of this is going to be a shared understanding between you and the city manager about where he and his staff is spending their time, at least on these particular areas, not exclusively. Right? Because that's that part of your role. You're trying to be proactive. That's what strategic planning does. And responsive to citizen needs and business owners' needs. The outcome of this is to make sure you're addressing with time and attention and resources those areas that you think are most critical to building a stronger Prescott community. Those other issues are going to come up at council meetings. People will be where I'm standing about some issue in July. That's not to say those items are somehow, not factored in. The outcome of this strategic planning is that you are going to make sure that on certain areas that you think are mission critical to this community, time and attention are going to be applied to make progress against those. So I see this as a dual approach, not a dichotomy, meaning that you can move in both directions, being proactive and responsive, not one or the other. And I think that's what you, and the communities I've worked with, the benefit they have is they have clear decision making about how they're building the community. Meanwhile, they're still dealing with issues that come up on a regular basis. And the final slide, I'm going to defer to the city manager on this about the milestones and how this essentially integrates with that process.
Well, Mayor and Council, as indicated on the screen, we thought it'd be useful to display on one sheet or one slide the relationship, or if nothing more than in the time frame, respectively, of the strategic planning process vis-a-vis the city budget process. So we've out on the left column, of course, March 28th is today. April 11th, we're having council interviews for some of the council members. These are the 1 hour face-to-face with Patrick interviews. And half of that day will be with the department heads facilitated with Patrick that he described. Completion of those council interviews, and it's one day or the other. It's not both days. It's 1 hour on either day, and that would be on April 18th. And then the full day advance meeting, which is the council meeting, the full day council meeting, which has a structured basis that the facilitator will be providing for council discussion, which leads to then the drafting and presentation of a draft strategic plan on June 7th, and then adoption on June 21st. Now, on the right column, while that's going on, as you know very well, the departments have been preparing their operating and capital budgets. Those budgets will be administratively approved, updated, revised, commented upon during the period April 21st to April 29th. We have 2 formal council budget workshops scheduled for May 12th and May 26th. Traditionally, we've done those in the library. Tentative budget adoption on June 7th and June 21st, the council adoption of the final budget. So I think we're going to be able to squeeze it in, the strategic planning process in the same time frame as the city budget process. And along the way, we'll have an idea of what the council's thinking or council's thinking is, and be able to implement that or consider that in the budget materials that we develop for you. So I think they're pretty good. We could have had the strategic planning process done months ago and so forth, and then use that for the purpose of compiling the budget, but it just didn't work out this way with the way the elections were and the new council being seated and so forth, and some of that orientation period where I think that we're in a much better position to have a lot of discussion about what we do in the city, what the priorities are, and how to best go about identifying outcomes and then measuring those. So I think it'll work out according to the what we have up on there. And I think that that's the last slide.
Yes, it is.
When we talked about an expedited process, we're also talking about an expedited presentation today, so the rest of it's up to you.
Okay, any questions, comments from the council? Councilwoman Orr?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, Craig, thank you so much first of all, Harry, thank you for supporting this idea to take a look at strategic planning. One of the things we heard a lot about last year was that we seem to be more reactive in our process here as opposed to proactive. So one of the things that I hope that we get out of this process, if we decide to move forward, is that we do become more proactive, that we look forward. We have a wonderful document, general plan, 113 pages, I think it is. It was approved by our citizens, and certainly it's a great basis upon which to begin. But we can't do it all. And my concern, I guess, that without a strategic plan, this goes on the shelf. And I believe with a strategic plan that we can really identify priorities. And I know they are priorities. People talk to us about them all the time. And so I think that's what this is about. Patrick, thank you for coming. And so if we're able to pull out those 4 or 5 things that we want to get done in 3 to 4 to 5 years. I mean, you have 2, maybe 4, 6, whatever. We have 4. There's a lot that we need to get done. And we can't just sit back and wait for it to happen. And that's why I would like to say I would put my support behind the strategic planning. And thank you for allowing this to come forward to council. And thank you, Craig, for your work on it.
Councilman Blair?
I think one thing I'd like to know is about the process, and maybe, Patrick, that's what we do individually with you, about our concerns personally. From my standpoint, I think what's crippling this community, what will continue to cripple this community, is our PSPRS and our debt that we owe. Somehow or another, during this strategic plan process and the city manager and staff's work program, we have got to figure out a positive strategic way to bring back to the citizens a sales tax increase, or this community is going to suffer no matter what we do as far as a strategic plan. I think that should be number 1, foremost on anybody's list that sits up here, because until it is, and we have another lawsuit in the hopper right now, this community, as we heard on our last presentation by the folks down at the state, could be facing upwards to $120 to $130 million in debt to our police officers and our firefighters. And we need to find a strategic way to let this community know that the quality of life is based upon our attitude and how we present those things to our community.
Yeah. Thanks, Council.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Thanks, Mayor. I agree with the process of a strategic plan. I think it's very critical to the community that the council, who's the policymakers, address our priorities. For several years, we keep kicking it down the road with regards to a permanent funding source for police and fire. Every year we wrestle with a thought process. How do you provide $35 million worth of something as basic as police and fire when you only take in 26? There needs to be a strategy to convey our thought process to our employees with regards to some sort of insurance that their jobs, while they may be here today, they may not be here tomorrow, that their benefit packages aren't challenged every 20 minutes because somebody wants a new soccer field or something of that nature. I think very similar to what Councilman Blair was saying, the sooner we address some of these issues, the better off this community is going to be. We know we've had a proliferation of certain kinds of industries in town that have challenged. We know that we have lawsuits that have challenged, and we need to know where the money's coming from. And until we sit down and decide how we're going to pay for what the citizens of the community of Prescott demand, we keep beating around the ears with no solid evidence that we're serious about taking care of the issues that we need to take care of.
Councilman Shiska?
Well, I appreciate both of your comments and Councilwoman Orr's. You know, one of the problems that we've had, that government in general has, is that there's a huge distrust of government. The decision-making process, the outcomes, the whole process is not trusted. You know, I think that if you think about it, when people ask a politician, they go, well, what have you gotten done? Usually the answer is, well, I fought for this, but what have you gotten done? And so ultimately what we're going to do is we're going to get stuff done through this process, and we're going to constantly go back to what do we need to do to get it done in the time frame which we set out. So as far as I'm concerned, and I think that I can say this from the business that I'm in, I can use the metaphor, I don't want the tail wagging the dog. I want this thing to be good. I want this thing to be clear to us and to the public. And I think it can be very, very, very powerful.
You want to respond to that, Patrick?
I agree with the councilman. I think all the comments are well-founded. This process does have a lot of benefit. At the same time, recognizing the expectations that it's the first time to the gym. So using the metaphor of getting in shape, unfortunately, you don't get into great shape by visiting the gym one time. You have to go back repeatedly, and that's what I've seen with communities I've worked with over several years, is they get stronger, they build capacity, they build their decision-making process. This is an apparatus, think of it that way, and that you get a chance to talk about things you don't always get a chance to talk about in a way you don't always get a chance to talk about them, because there's no voting at these kind of processes. And I think that helps you have more candid and constructive discussions in building the community. So I think all these comments are very well position to this process succeed, and I would appreciate the opportunity to work with you on this, and I think you'll see great dividend, both to Councilmember Shiska. I think you'll see it soon, and a quick dividend as well as longer term. I think it really helps you sharpen your focus, and I'm scaling that down, but sharpening your focus when you're contending with all these ambiguous factors, and some are clear cut and financial. That's by no means some easy task. It takes some heavy lifting.
Well, one of my thoughts and one of my concerns is, first of all, you have a 3 to 5 year plan, and I see the budget as the operational plan to carry out the first year of the strategic plan. And of course, next year we'll be in year 1 of the strategic plan again. Right. You'll always be in year 1, and you're using a budget to try and accomplish year 1 goals and objectives. I guess the concern I have is I see that we adopt a strategic plan on June 21st, and we adopt the final budget on June 21st. So I guess in my mind, the way I've done in the past, we're like city manager said, we're a little out of sync here. We should have probably had the strategic plan done several months ago, and now we would be building the budget to make that first year of the strategic plan work. So I guess my question is, how do we reconcile the fact that we're completing the strategic plan and on June 21st, and we're also completing the final budget. How do we make sure that that budget is going to start addressing those first-year goals and objectives?
I think you're going to see that there's a real symbiotic relationship, an overlap between those two topics, those two processes. Ideally, it would have been probably more effective coming out of the gate where you have the strategic planning sessions ahead of the budget. However, I think you'll still see benefit that there is some ebb and flow and overlap between what you're discussing, what you would be discussing on May 6th at the one-day council advance, and how that, and the city manager is definitely going to be responsive incorporating that into the budget process. And remember, too, the strategic planning is not simply about how you allocate dollars and cents. It's also about policy issues and where you want to focus some time and attention for the city. Not necessarily, and the budget typically is around fiscal resources and where you're going to spend money on making this progress, where you're going to spend money on that activity or this capital. So I think you'll see that it works well together. If anything, I think it will help for all of you, especially those of you that are new on council, I think it helps deepen your thinking because you're going to be immersed in it for a while on both processes, both the strategic planning process, and I think that helps you when you're having those budget discussions, just bring more to the table and your understanding about all these moving pieces and how they fit together.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for your comments. There is a total disconnect. It's been quite a while. Some of us been here a while clamoring that there's a disconnect, and it's very difficult to go into a budget and agree to support a budget when the budget doesn't address the issues that you've been asking to be addressed year after year. And there is a disconnect. We have yet, in the last 13 years, come in with a funding mechanism that's necessary to assure police and fire that we're not going to be pitting them against every other operation in the city year after year after year with regards to O&M. It's very difficult to assure the rest of the city. Nobody wants to deny anybody in the city the opportunity to continue functioning as public servants in the city, but every year it's kind of like a football game and you're kicking everybody back and forth across the various different spots. And it's going to be very difficult to be very positive looking at a budget again this year, trying to figure out, okay, where's the money come from? You brought me $34, $35, $36 million. What have we done about generating the revenue beyond $26, $28 million? And where does that disconnect? How does that get paid for? We still haven't addressed it. We still have not addressed how we're going to take care of not only the indebtedness this community's been saddled with on PSPRS, and it's not that it's our individual police department or our individual fire department, our soldiers on the front line doing. It happened. This happened. It happened in Phoenix. And, the fact of the matter still remains, we're obligated by law to make sure that that's kept whole. We haven't come up with how to keep it whole. The public rejected what we came up with last time. This isn't a whipping the public. They said go back to the drawing board and come up with something different. Well, gosh, guys, we never came up with something different. We haven't done a thing yet. And here we are, here again, the day before the last dog is hung. Budget's here. What are we going to do? Fact of the matter is, we know we have to do something. Just sharing that with you.
Councilman Blair?
Mayor?
Yes, Councilwoman Wilcox, you want to go next?
Yes, I would.
Okay, go ahead. I'll have Blair follow you. Go ahead.
I want to make to the point that it's essential that we all read the general plan because that is our community's vision of the future. And that's the plan that was adopted by an overwhelming majority of the voters. I think it should be the foundation of our strategic plan. The strategic plan is the next step forward. It's how we're going to accomplish and implement the general plan. So I would encourage all members of the council and our consultant to reread the general plan. And secondly, I think we need a stronger emphasis on financial planning for the city. How are we going to pay for all these priorities? When? And when do we go back to the voters with how much of a sales tax, if that's the only tool we have? I heard Mr. Ibarra say that after 9/11 there's too much volatility, there's no more 20-year long-term planning. I disagree that we need to give up long-term planning. If 5 years is long-term, that's not enough. We need to look farther into the future. Even if things change and we modify that as we go along, we've got to look into the future.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Blair?
Well, I just want to say I'm kind of excited about this, just so you know that, because back when I first sat on this council in 1998, a whole lot different time today than it was then. Times were good, money was coming in. We had a strategic planning company that set out mission statements for this council for the first 5 years. It became too expensive to do. 2006 hit, 2005 hit. That went away. Priorities and mind thoughts went away. Back in those days, again, we had a lot of money. Our employees were doing well. We didn't have the debt that we have with PSPRS. Those things weren't looming around our neck. And so what we've been doing the last several years is just going from year to year, knowing through our management that we had financial implications coming. And we kept saying they were coming, and we kept warning every department and every citizen out there they're coming. They're here. They're here in a big way. And it's about time we went back to a strategic focus of what's right to get accomplished for this community. So I'm looking forward to your expertise.
Patrick, do you have a couple comments based on what has already been stated by the council here?
I agree with Councilmember Wilcox that I think the general plan does provide quite a bit of substance to help, and this strategic planning process helps activate that. I think the land use plan in some respects is sort of the blueprint, and a very large blueprint to do so many things around the community. It's a matter of what and when. So I think that's the challenge will be, there won't be a shortage of any ideas that you all come up with about how to address these issues, as in most councils. And that's a good thing, you're idea creators. The challenge will be is sifting through those and exercising your judgment based on the temperature of the community. There are some communities that say, this is what we can afford, so that's all we can do. There are other communities who say, this is what we want to be, and they figure out how to finance it. And I think for increasingly communities are at that fork in the road. Sometimes you just need to take it. So.
Mayor, if I could, I got one other question that's bothering me here real quick. With what the mayor said and what you just said, I find it interesting that some of the things we talk about when you start talking about land use planning and the process of sitting on the Planning Commission for 4 years, which I did, I find it unique that we have a state government that will dictate to a charter community that we can no longer charge impact fees for public safety, police, fire, library, parks and recreation. These are the very amenities in our community that our citizens deserve when they move here and decide to relocate. How do you, as somebody that's been around for a while, suggest to this community that we address that with our legislative folks down there? This is another element of what's putting a hammer around us where we can't provide the things we need to provide because of laws that have been enacted that have handcuffed this community. How do we strategically ask them to loosen up the grip on our community?
Well, that's a pretty meaty topic there, and we know in the state it's challenging, and communities, throughout the state are confronted by that. I wish I had the answer for that, council member, that it was a simple fix. I think it's complicated, and there's a lot of politics that are the undercurrent of that whole subject. It's not just in this state. Again, I have clients all over. There is that real active notion about the almost cities and states pitting each other against each other about how do you finance local government. I think this process will allow you, in some respects, to really revisit the assumptions you have about what kind of community you're trying to build. Governments do a lot of things well. One of the things that not do well is stop doing things. So I think you have the opportunity to identify what is it that you really want to try to do as an organization to build that quality of life, and what is it that you're going to decide, like in any enterprise, you decide what you're not going to do anymore, and I know those are difficult decisions. But with resources being constrained, and you look on the horizon with fiscal impacts of the PSPRS contributions, those are tough decisions you're going to have to make. And whether it's increasing revenue or thinning, maximizing your operations and becoming more efficient, whatever that looks like, and those are always challenges as well. So I wish I had a quick, simple answer for you on that. And
I wish you did too.
I know you did. So I'm sorry I don't. As soon as I do, I'll let you know.
City Manager, I believe the general plan is what, a 10-year plan, basically?
voted on it, too.
I mean, roughly. So I think that's really our long-range plan, as
Right.
Councilwoman Wilcox was talking about, and I see the strategic plan as a way to start, put some parameters and goals and objectives and some milestones to that plan to the strategic plan. And looking at the work plan, I think, thinking about it a little bit more, I think the planning sessions with the council and then eventually working with the city manager and his staff, I can see where we can probably start to facilitate a lot of our ideas of this, the first year of the strategic plan, and it would be built into the final budget. So looking at the work plan, I think that's going to be workable for us. So I'm looking forward to that process, because obviously it's going to have to be one of the things that's going to start answering the questions on where we get the funding to keep the library open, to keep our recreational services ongoing, and also to pay the debt that we have.
Right.
So looking back on, I think that looks like that's going to be workable for us. Yeah.
Good.
Is there any other questions or comments from the council?
Mayor, I'd like to make a comment. As you pointed out, the slide and the screen does depict a side-by-side process instead of a sequential process, which is more typical. On the other hand, as we've said, or I've said, maybe we've all said over and over and over, we've been in doing the base work for this for a number of years. Through the budget processes, through the presentations, et cetera, we've really identified the most important dimensions of what we're dealing with here. And so I think with the process that is being suggested to you, we will be able to address, the services that the city provides, which are linked to quality of life, the resources it takes to do that, the financial resources, the personnel resources, and to the councilman's last point, the relationships we have, whether it's with the state legislature or whether it's with the county government or other municipalities. Another dimension, very important dimension, is relationships. Some of those relationships come with money, some of those relationships cost money, and so forth. So I think that we do have a pretty well prepared background from which to draw upon and make this an effective process to create a strategic plan. We have not been asleep for the last couple of years. While we don't have a document we can hand up now, that's the objective of this particular process. And I think that we will do that effectively and certainly efficiently, and we're certainly looking forward to that.
Any other questions, comments from the council? Okay, I'll open it up to the public for a few minutes here. If anybody has any points of clarification, questions they would like to ask.
My name is Daniel Matson. Sorry I got here late. I just wanted to point out concerning the general plan, I was there at all the meetings. When we prepared the general plan, we weren't sitting there and saying we want all of this to be done right away or anything like that. It was, if these things are done, here's the way we want it to be done. So I'm just hoping that nobody gets lost with the idea that if it's in the general plan, it has to happen and has to happen now, because that wasn't the intention. Thank you.
Okay, thank Dan. Anyone else? Okay, I think we'll move forward. At this point, I think there's general consensus on the council to move forward and bring this up for a vote with the council.
And Mayor, we will be submitting an item for the next council meeting, regularly scheduled council meeting of April 5th for approval of the contract, which will then set this process in motion.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. Meeting adjourned.